Fantastic. Okay. Well, I would just like to echo Hannah's opening remarks and the sentiment she expressed. It's an absolute privilege to be here, and it's very much we feel our spiritual home. So yeah, I echo everything that she so articulately said, and thanks so much to Schumann and Lucrezia and Barani for all the hard work that's gone in to putting this event on so far. Our next session is Offline is the new online, and I would like to just quickly set the scene. So, how do we distinguish offline from online? What happens when the URL spills into the IRL? How are online infrastructures starting to shape offline spaces? Our online experiences increasingly frame and inform our offline ones. They change the way we use language, the way we relate to each other, the way we digest information, and the way we make meaning. The collapse in the presumed linearity of global narratives in the past decade, in tandem with the entrenchment of digital infrastructures during COVID, have led to an alienated experience of reality that feels both stranger than fiction and as on the nose as the most mid-Netflix series. And here I'm particularly thinking of the Cybertruck crashing into Trump Tower. It's just awful script writing. Distrust over authenticity and provenance of content, and indeed personhood online, directly affects the way we navigate the IRL. This distrust leads to theories such as the real-life existence of non-player characters, or NPCs, the characters in video games not controlled by human players and whose actions, mannerisms, and movements are predetermined by code or AI. Interestingly, the figure of the NPC had its own miniature character arc last year. What started out as a right-wing derogatory stand-in for sheeple then became a somewhat aspirational and fetishized position. Think of Pinky Doll's TikTok live streams and the post-ironic mantra, live, laugh, lobotomize. The burden of main character syndrome is too much, and agency, it would seem, is slightly overrated. It's much more appealing instead to mindlessly aura farm as the world burns around you. Perhaps another way, though, we could frame touch points between online and offline is a speculative notion of non-player world. Rather than being a simple reformulation of simulation theory, which is the idea that the world does not really exist, non-player world is instead a theory of a very real world becoming increasingly inhuman, increasingly populated by spatial typologies directly shaped and optimized by and for the affordances of AI and automation, such as the lights-out dark factories in China. Similarly, we've seen the open outcry of 20th century financial market pits gently fade into the white noise of GPU fans in climate-controlled industrial warehouses on the outskirts of major cities, where high-frequency trading algorithms operate at clinically efficient inhuman speeds. Non-player world could also be more diffusely conceived of as a real-life vibe of the virtual, a content-pilled lens rendering spaces and places as mere simulacra and us as tourists in our own reality. Another 20th century premonition of non-player world was identified by the Japanese psychiatrist Hiroaki Ota in the 1980s. He had noticed a psychological condition emerging amongst some Japanese tourists when visiting Paris, who experienced severe disappointment or culture shock when their idealized, mediated virtual impressions of the city were not matched by reality. Paris syndrome, as it became known, was, or perhaps still is, characterized by symptoms such as delusions, hallucinations, anxiety, derealization, and dizziness. There are even unconfirmed reports that the Japanese embassy in Paris offers a 24-hour hotline for affected tourists with treatment involving rest, counseling, or repatriation. So, non-player world is perhaps not something we can just switch off. You can't just go off grid or to Paris and hope that the effects of neural media, network culture, or even the information age just go away. Phenomena like Shrimp Jesus and Fartcoin are, it seems, very real, and you should take them and these opening remarks incredibly seriously. What we are witnessing is the unfolding of a process through which the world becomes terminally online. It's a state of mind, an irreversible contagion tearing through the field of semiotics to darken the doorstep of even the most off-grid prepper. Which brings me on to the next session, in which Anna Nicolaescu will present aspects of Too Many Humans, an ongoing research report charting the total collapse of spatial typologies into instant or disappearing architectures. Anna is a London-based artist and researcher. Her work investigates the representational, spatial and socio-political relationships embedded within image technologies. Alongside Sebastian Chu, she is co-founder of Cream Project, a studio who use emerging image-making technologies as tools for visibility across research and direction projects. She also teaches at the Architectural Association, and I will hand over to her now as she walks us through an online-offline focused digest of Too Many Humans. Please give her a warm welcome.
Hello. Hello. Okay. Thank you so much. It's so great to be here. Thank you for the invitation. So as Declan said, I'm going to share a sort of GAF edition version of this research report that is part of a much larger kind of moving image work that I've been doing with Seb over the last couple of years. So very broadly speaking, what this work looks at is the spaces and workforces that have kind of emerged out of our increasing reliance on tech infrastructures. And I just want to make a side note, because I think it's quite nice in relation to other presentations as well, around the methodology of this work. It kind of heavily relies on game engines and related workflows, like motion capture and camera mapping. And generally for us, as you said as well, these tools are very much tools for visibility. And in this case, they're really a way of instrumentalizing an open world to do a sort of kind of different type of world building, which is to kind of almost rebuild a world that is already here, but in many ways is probably kind of stuck in some sort of back end. So yeah, I'm going to kind of recontextualize this work through this kind of online-offline paradigm. It ain't working. Okay. So I'll be talking about 4 case studies today, but they're all kind of manifestations of what really happens when platform logics reshape both our spaces and bodies. So what happens when the logic of swiping and clicking somehow mutates into the logic of walking through and breathing in? So what happens then, by extension, when humans become something smooth and trackable and programmable? This is not the right presentation, guys. Anyway, let's move on. This was a slide that has somehow glitched, but wait. Sorry.
We can just get it back up and assist.
Yeah?
We'll power through.
Can you guys get it back up, please? Yeah, okay. Anyway, what I was trying to say here in a different version of this presentation is that the offline and online are kind of no longer binary categories anyway. So we're going to use them here as a sort of gradient to talk about how space and behavior are being rewritten by statistics and metrics and business models. So a world where logistics come first and bodies come last. Again, we're going to make it work. Very important disclaimer, I'm afraid to say that I feel like none of this is really new. So architecturally, certainly these conditions that we're talking about are at best sort of version updates of things that have been happening and evolving for centuries, if you think about the kind of history of capitalism. So they're part of a kind of social operating system, if you like, that has for long been made visible through grids, standardization, and even kind of typological design. Things that have always been about managing space, our bodies, and crucially, things that make narratives around them happen. So a system that makes very messy things very clear, and therefore easier to extract from. It just so happens that in 2025, and with all these conditions I'm going to be talking about, is that this system kind of almost reached a terminal point where it's optimized itself so much. So keep this image in mind as we'll kind of move into, oh, it's back. Keep these two images in mind as we're going to go through the presentation. I'm not going to kind of go into them too much, but let's go. So, the dark kitchen. Using the definition that commercial kitchen operator DEFNA uses, this term isn't about spooky vibes or haunted kitchens. It is simply used to emphasize the lack of front of house presence. So born in India in 2015, dark kitchens expanded into a 72 billion global market in just a decade, and they're continuing to expand. And what is really important about these spaces is that they're literally algorithmically generated environments. The physical layout, the workflow, and even air circulation are optimized for app-based delivery times rather than worker comfort or food quality. It's a case where, in this kind of online-offline transfer, the acceleration of circulation trumps any other values. Shifts are not scheduled, they're streamlined. So riders toggle between 0 to 30 work hours a week based on demand spikes. And so the waiting room, and certainly the city, if we've been walking around and see clusters of riders, they become sort of stuck as kind of platformed bodies in between a sort of reality and a kind of back-end logic. Essentially, they're workers that are essentially kind of submitting to a line of code. These kitchens exemplify also how architectural typologies and even kind of architecture as a practice in certain cases solely respond to UX design and marketing strategies, which also kind of give rise to really new tech-pilled language for kind of architectural typologies like cloud kitchens, or my personal favorite, central processing unit kitchens. And also where there's this kind of absence of experience or kind of experience lag in the real world, they're being repackaged by kind of cheap lulls like the ones that you see here on the screen, and I'm going to read it out loud because it's worth it. Connecting busy professionals with like-minded hummus. Speed and profit become then the only metric. Ambience, ritual, arguably are kind of written out. And what's left is that single kind of transaction at the door that I'm sure a lot of you experience when the rider comes and they ask, what's the code? So the experience is stripped to its most measurable parts, even kind of linguistically. Okay, moving on. So most Amazon Prime orders come from a so-called structured robot fields. They're kind of vast gridded zones inside fulfillment centers. And they have two jobs and two jobs only. How much product sits on the floor and how fast it moves, and logically how much profit it generates. It is a space structured like a city, but run like a game. So what you see is a city-like grid mapped along north, south, east, west axes, run by a kind of proprietary cloud computing service. So essentially they're warehouses as urban operating systems. The few humans who work alongside Hercules are called amnesty responders, performing for kind of robotic systems that are kind of stuck in between this kind of really weird duality. So they, one, determine the tempo of action, but at the same time they fail and get stuck quite frequently. So to keep the systems growing, the workers walk up to 20 miles a day. Contractually, they're never allowed to sit down and move strictly according to back-end flow charts. So they become these kind of live debuggers, navigating a map of error codes. They wear tech vests with sensors and transmitters. Without these vests, they would be completely invisible to the machines. So visibility here is about system legibility and not presence. But what's more important here, I think, is that like Hercules and the vests and everything else that comes in these operating system as warehouse, is that this entire setup is a sort of DIY mashup of acquired patents that have never been put together before. So it's a condition that is purely born out of this kind of like business strategy point of view. And speaking of business strategy, a few years ago, Amazon introduced FC Games. They are literal games like Tamazilla, Castle Crafter, and Dragon Duel that turn work into a loop of productivity and reward, right? Much more immediate than, let's say, receiving a salary. So in Dragon Duel, a worker competes against another by scanning the most items at a picking station. So again, it's a case of kind of filling that experience lag that we were talking about in the dark kitchens, this time with gamification. I wanted to put this here for absolutely no intellectual reason. But in the context of all of this, I think it's kind of endearing and cute and a nice reminder that somehow, unlike an operating system, there's really kind of no patch for being human, which is a really nice thing to think about. Okay, so moving maybe on a different side of the coin, I'll briefly talk about research and development spaces. They're also very crucial when thinking about our reliance on tech infrastructures and what happens to our bodies inside of them. Even more so because they often sit at odds with the kind of glossy kind of narrative futures that we like to construct about our relationship with tech and innovation. So a clean room is a typology that has existed since 1st century Rome, so really, really not new, very, very old. But what's interesting now is that how these spaces almost function like, you know, the future's like engine rooms, especially when you think about things like quantum. Yet they leave almost no room for us, at least not for our non-optimizing bodies, because they're designed to eliminate human traces. So there's absolutely no room for error here. So in the class 100 clean room, no more than 100 particles over 1.5 microns can be present. So for reference, a human hair is 75 microns thick. So air is regulated and recirculated up to 600 times an hour. So this is a kind of architecture that is reduced to its pure technical function, lighting, flooring, furniture. They're all selected for a minimal particle output. And inside, really, the body is a total liability. So researchers are transformed via strict gowning rituals. Their contamination rate is measured in what is called a body box, and they're trained to move incredibly slowly and speak incredibly softly because of the contamination of particles. So they almost perform like what was described in the 20th century as a completely new language, no? But this time, it's a language of bodily constraint and, you know, in service of this kind of technological precision. They're environments where years of innovation could be ruined by a particle 100x smaller than a flake of skin. And this is a really interesting tension because it's a tension between control and fragility that puts us in an entirely new terrain, which is almost this kind of really like literal coexistence with the invisible and having to be kind of aware of it in a very kind of fleshy way. Okay, last but not least, the Human Robot Demonstration Lab, again, a great example to rethink the back end of insatiable tech narratives. So this typology, again, started in Japan around 50 years ago. And of course, today is supplemented by Gen AI models, which soon will render it as a kind of obsolete typology. But what these labs are is that they contain kind of fake offices and test kitchens. They're not designed, obviously, for humans to live in, but for robots to learn from. So they are almost like performance stages for scientists and sort of kind of kindergartens for robots. Human movements are captured, digitized, transferred to machines via motion capture or LiDAR. Often an action like waving is repeated 1,000 times, if not more. So in spaces like these, this kind of form of labor that these people are performing isn't a kind of, the commodity isn't the physical products, but kind of a kind of human embodied knowledge in itself. As I briefly mentioned, things are rapidly happening with Gen AI. So Lucid Sim from MIT is an incredible research around this. I won't have time to talk about it, but take note and do look if you're interested. But maybe what's most interesting in this, in the context of this talk, is that we already kind of have at the output end, the two distinct narratives, that are being played out. So on the left, you have Figure AI, a company that's developing robots for heavy-duty labor. And on the right, you have OpenAI, who's developing Neo, famously, pitched the masses as a kind of almost friend, a sort of kind of perfect flatmate. And also, we have the third narrative, military R&D. So the Cyborg Soldier 2050 report, which again, I highly recommend, I don't have time to talk about it too much now, outlines a total integration, quote, of so-called robot characteristics via neural implants, amongst other things, like spinal implants, within the human body, as a way of, quote, boosting and enhancing performance over the next 30 years. So, just to wrap it up, I think we've reached the logical end point of the talk with this, with the nervous system kind of becoming a node in itself. And I'm just going to play a video just to lighten up the mood. Keep the music going, keep the dance flowing. Please play. Yeah, thank you very much. Oh, no. Okay, perfect.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you to the team at the back who helped a lot. Thank you.
On? Can I have this one on? And then I'll thank you. Is this on? Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much. That was absolutely amazing. And I get really sad watching that video of the robot being beaten up. And I anthropomorphize him. And, I think we are really living to see man-made horrors beyond our comprehension. Anyway, so one thing that...
They'll be okay.
It won't. One of the things that struck me is that throughout this presentation, we started to notice sometimes we're talking about the online invading the offline, but also a lot of this is optimization for or by capital as well. The virtual, the inhuman, forces of alienation. And I think that leads me very succinctly to my main question, which is, what's your screen time like?
Between 8 and 9.
A day?
Yeah. I don't know, is
hefty.
that bad? That's good.
Is that good? Okay, well done.
Is it good in the sense that I'm like really plugged in, or good in the sense of like...
You're
very
incredibly offline.
Great. Fantastic.
What I really would like to know is, when we first met, you explained to me and Hannah that you and Seb were going to an Amazon fulfillment center, right? Mm-hmm. For a tour. Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure.
Could you tell us about your experience there?
Sure. I mean, the strangest experience, speaking of kind of, human experience, is that the kind of Amazon beyond all the horrors, right? But the Amazon workers are taught and told that when these tours happen, they have to smile because it's the kind of Amazon kind of logo, the smile. So you walk past and they're, like picking, and then they kind of go just like. It's a weird it's the only other place I saw that happen was at Disneyland, where it's this kind of like very performative, like, hello, welcome. And then the tour was really strange. The tour guides kind of looked like Kanye West, which was really confusing. What else? They have like, these kind of Amazonian kind of spaces for like, you know, LGBTQ plus Amazonians and this Amazon. So they take you through all of that. And then, you know, you get to the kind of like structured robot field and it's like dark.
Yeah.
It's dark. Like literally dark, I mean.
Well, yeah, and that this
It's
is
dark.
similar to the recent appearance of the dark factories, the lights out factories in China. But again, we're, you know, so much of the time I think throughout this we will conflate, and it's hard not to, you know, automation, AI, online, capital are all forces that are converging to alienate the IRL. And kind of the point I was making at the top before I sort of was cheeky and a bit mean to you, was, you know, actually it strikes me as some of this research and this the moments where the online and the offline crash up against each other is very much like Daniel Felsted's Janky Capitalism. Shout out to Daniel at the back.
Shout out.
Yeah, his amazing research into Janky Capitalism. These moments where the online and offline, you know, don't quite fit. And I was just wondering, you know, are there any examples perhaps of, you know, we talk about the URL seeping into the IRL, but are there any examples where the reverse happens, like where physical spaces resist or disrupt online logic?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends what we mean by online logic and offline logic, but I think an example that I experienced was when I visited the data center in Canary Wharf in London. Whoever's in London should visit. It's amazing. You know, when the tour guide was talking about it, it all came from the kind of point of view of security. I mean, obviously we're asking a lot of questions about architecture because I was there with my students, but and he showed us these kind of grills that are designed to stop USBs from seeping through. And they have just the right amount of kind of opening so that, you know, kind of people can't hack the data, you know. So it was more around these kind of security measures that were being taken there. Also, there was an interesting moment where they were testing how heated the floor would get in the data center before they were installing the kind of racks, but they were doing that with literal heaters. So they were, so there was just like this kind of data center floor without any kind of, I guess, online, yeah, like kind of hardware in it, but then there was just kind of heaters, like your classic, you know, kind of plug-in heaters to test, you know. So I think, yeah, I don't know how far the kind of offline can resist the online, but it's interesting when it's kind of being instrumentalized to support it increasingly, you know. And I think this is the kind of stuff in the research as well, no, that it's not necessarily, it's not even a feedback loop, but the offline is kind of being weaponized to fulfill and maintain kind of online logics as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was just wondering as well, off the back of that, what's the most offline space that you've been to recently or can think of? And can we imagine architectures or infrastructures that actively slow down engagement, countering this kind of instant gratification model?
Well, I think it's a bit wishful thinking that anything could stop it at this point. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's very, very hard to think about a space where that doesn't seep through. I mean, you know, you could say, oh, well, it's still a kind of like retreat or like, you know, I think that's a kind of very boring way to answer it, and I don't have a better answer, to be honest. The most offline space I've been to, I mean, I often, like when I'm in the sauna, I think about that, but then I realize, well, I just kind of tap my card and they kind of, so it's very hard, you know, once you get into that loop of like linking everything together, you often find out that you're still online somehow.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think possibly last year when I was in Dubai, I think the heat might have actually made my iPhone have a bit of a meltdown and stuff. So perhaps Dubai has some potential for, you know, during heat waves to be incredibly offline.
I think more than spaces, I think it's more like moisture and temperature and conditions, which I think that has more of a kind of potential to stop it, but not a kind of typology. And I think this is what's interesting as well, is that I was talking about earlier about kind of the disillusion of kind of typologies as we kind of understand them in architecture. It's because things are moving at a pace, they're moving so fast, you know, that it's very hard for the real world, the material world, to kind of pick up the pieces and kind of catch up, no?
Do you, you know, do you have a sense of like, I mean, I think your screen time's pretty bad. Are you
Really?
like, yeah, I think that's quite hardcore, like 8 hours.
Yeah.
But is this something like online spaces and being online, is that something like, is the only way out of this through? Do we just like persist, or should we switch off more? What do you think?
I mean, I don't know, without this getting into a kind of wellness conversation, yes, we should touch grass. Like, we should, but I'm not, again, I think at a kind of model level, like if we really have to switch off, we need to kind of reinvent, you know, capitalism. You know, like it's very, I think it's gotten very difficult. I mean, if we think about the kind of history of kind of the technology corridors, right, as a kind of architectural, again, typology in like in the US, but they also happen in the UK. I mean, we would have to like, you know, kind of start fresh somehow in order to like find ways to live without this kind of, you know, infrastructure, both online and offline.
Absolutely. So one of the, I can see that we're slowly reaching the end. Now, one of the, hopefully, a recurring theme that we're going to have throughout our sessions this year is we've run the numbers, we've run all of the prepared materials that we have for each session into DeepSeek. And we have asked DeepSeek to come up with some fun questions for us. So each session will be closing with a fun question. And this one, actually, that's probably my favorite, actually, again, sort of touches on these moments like, you know, the metaverse in Janky Capitalism, Daniel Felsted's amazing video essay, these moments where they butt up against each other and don't quite fit. So the fun DeepSeek question is, what's the most offline activity you've seen someone do in an intensely online space?
I made a list.
Fantastic.
I'll be really quick. First one was when I took my students from the AA to Miami, and we were sitting at dinner, and there were ads, and it was Miami, right? And there was this guy who was wearing an Apple Vision Pro. And like, it was the first time I saw someone wear an Apple Vision Pro. And I'm assuming that he didn't have the kind of curtains open, you know, like the thingy. So he was eating, but he was like completely unable to function. So that's one. Sleeping vlogs on YouTube. And for that matter, like vlogs where no one's watching. I think those are great. Drake hitting the drone with his slipper. I don't know if you've seen that. It was great. It was really disappointing that it turned out to be a marketing scheme for steak, but still pretty iconic.
So many are now. So many memes are like watermarked.
Yeah. And then just last week in Milan, we were at the park, and this tourist was singing the most beautiful kind of Chinese song at one of these kind of like open mics, and kind of everyone was filming, but I swear he was not there. I mean, he was switched off. He was in a whole infrastructure that he had created for himself in that moment. It was really beautiful to watch.
I mean, it would seem that Milan is potentially another version of Tokyo syndrome. Perhaps there's Milan syndrome, because when me and Hannah went there, we went and saw the Duomo and just had this totally derealized experience where we were just so underwhelmed by it. We just thought like, oh, I've seen the photos, and like, you know, it just kind of and everyone's taking selfies in front of it. And I know this sounds so boomer pilled, but it was just like, yeah, this doesn't feel real. It feels all a bit kitsch, and it just feels like a bit of a backdrop, really. It just feels like a theatre set.
It is, but then, you know, like, I think you get invited to a dinner then at your friend's mom's house, and she makes some pasta, and then it feels very real.
And that's how we touch grass.
And that's how you touch grass in Milan.
Heartwarming. Okay, everyone give it up for Anna Nicolaescu.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to have a 10-minute break now. So we will reconvene at 10 to 5. Is that okay? 4:48. Oh, 4:48, precisely, on the dot.